Well, welcome everybody. We're just going over business organization, really basic stuff. This video and this chapter is some of the basics to either starting a business, some of the financials to that bit. So we're doing financial algebra, which means it's just all the algebra related to business organization. A few things about business. So businesses thrive on what we call capital. Capital is that investment coming in the beginning to start it. So if you're bootstrapping your own business, that means going all by yourself. You don't have somebody backing you. That you're putting your own money into that. That's the capital you're putting in. You are a sole proprietor, which means you are the one responsible, regardless of who you hire to help you and what you're paying them. At the end of the day, you are responsible for helping your business grow and stay in the green. And you are on the hook and liable even to your own assets, your own money that you have outside of the business, should it not do well and you have some debts that you have to pay off. Now, ultimately, our whole goal is to have profit. Now, again, non-for-profit businesses still need profit. They still need to earn money coming in, whether that goes to something else and just building the business or whatever the legal justification of what you call yourself, the business needs profit. That's revenue minus expenses. After everything's paid off and there's no one that is owed any money, the money left over is profit. Now, how you use that profit is up to you, but for a new business starting out, you better be putting that money into the business. Which is again why it's stressful and challenging for businesses to thrive or even just survive in the very first years of inception, because they've got to be able to afford to live as well as help the business run. If you are in a point where you don't have a whole lot of money or capital by yourself, you have somebody else who's also committed and equally excited to go into this business with you, you can be what's called a partnership. And partnership does not just mean you and one other person. It could be you and 10 people. Partnership just means that everybody is equally on the hook for that business, which means if you have 10 partners and one of them is playing the Judas role and kind of selling everybody else out, you're all going to pay the price for that decision. And so there are ways to legally work through that as well, but we're not going into that for the purposes of this discussion. More so, we want to understand how that works. The last one that we want to talk about is corporations. So we see about all the time, a lot of companies become corporations as they get big enough. Corporations typically are owned by either investors that originally came in, or an IPO, or a public offering where you've gone out and you've pulled money from everybody else and given them a percentage, albeit small, depending on how many stocks that you actually sell, and how many total shares of stock that you had. They're still part ownership, so to speak, in this business, but they are only limited, or they're only at liability for what they've put in, which means if they don't do well, that's the equivalent of buying a bad stock and having it tank. You're not on the hook for the millions of dollars that may be lost. You're just on the hook for the money that you purchased. Just a bit of background on stock. Stock came originally from sailing ships that would go, and merchant ships that would go and sail, and they would need investors. So they would need people who would fund this voyage to go across to different countries, to travel, to trade, and come back with rewards. Now, there was a risk that if they were to come back with nothing, or their ship were to crash and sink at sea, or they never came back, that you would be losing that money. And that's similar to the stock market today, or at least the concept is the same. And so when you're in a corporation and you sell stock, that person is buying a fraction of your company, hoping that the money that you receive goes into the building of this company to make it better, because they want to buy something for low and then sell it for high and watch it just rise and rise and rise. They don't want to see lots of zigzagging and things like that. That's stressful. If you're going to buy stock, the same thing. You just have to understand that you are taking that risk, and that ship may or may not come back, so to speak. Just a couple calculations for my students here. When we're going into ownership, if I say that I'm going to invest in, I don't know, we could be selling shoes. right? We've got a nice pair of sandals that don't stink ever. Like they don't get sweaty. They're amazing. It's awesome tech. We're really excited about it, but we need some startup capital. And I decide I'm totally for this. I lived in Arizona. Sweaty feet is like the norm. Um, and so I'm all about those people in Arizona not having stinky feet anymore. Um, so I'm going to donate, or not donate. I want some money back from this. I'm going to invest this 15,000. This is my investment. Now, I find out that we've got a few people that are also helping out. There's 3 others. So I am one of 4, and the total investment was $240,000. There's some people that are committed to this. I am not a quarter. I am one of 4 investors, but I am definitely not 25% invested into this. A quick way to check what level I am is to take how much I've invested dollars wise and divide it by the total. And that gives me roughly 6.25%. So I am at 1/18th of the total investment. Now if they say, hey, based on your buy-in and everything else, you have certain rights, they might go and look at that information and say that, sorry, you have to be at least 10% stakeholder in this business, in this new company, to receive some of the perks or to receive a say at the table, or whatever. Now again, there's different types of stock and all that. We're not really covering that in this section, but that's that first calculation that we're going to deal with going forward here. The second thing we want to look at is, well, I want to know how many stocks I actually have. Like I fixed and said, look, I will buy into your business at 12%. And when we started out, there were 100 stocks, and I bought 12 of them. Shares of stock were 100. I have 12 shares. Since then, the business has grown. So it was at 100. And now it's grown to, let's see, 600, and that looks like a ship. That's interesting. It's grown to 650,000. I still am told that I have 12% of this business, not 12% of the stocks, 12% of the overall business. I am entitled to that. If I want to sell those shares, they have to pay me for every one of those shares. Or if those are dividend earning shares, which is just money that could go to building the company, but they don't need to. They don't have anything on the books to build right now or to add, so they're going to return some of that money to their shareholders. I have 12% of this. I can go and just calculate that as 12 over 100. Again, this is just 12%, but hopefully you can see how this works. We end up getting 12 times 650,000, and that equals 100x. We would then divide by 100. That's going to cross out 2 of those zeros, and we're going to be left with 78,000. I had a typo in here. We have 12 times 6,500. We get 78,000 shares. Let's say I bought those shares for $1 a piece. If they're still worth $1 a piece, I had a considerable growth. Obviously, whether I sell those or not, that's one of the first calculations that we talk about in here. Again, shareholders have certain rights or certain privileges and things that may come with it depending on how much you have. So I would say I've got at least a relatively a sizable percent of the company, but maybe not enough to say this is how we're going to do things. So now we can also look at ratios. Let's say me and 2 others, we're a partner of 3, and we're going to invest in a garden business. It's a garden and landscaping store, and we're investing total $900,000 into this business to open it up, to get it going. And so if we're looking at a ratio, let's say 2, 3, and 5, meaning, hey, that's how, if you think about it, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, there's total of 100% there. I'm looking at 20% of for one person, 30 for another, and 50. Somebody's putting more skin in the game. Somebody's not putting as much. We want to say, well, then, financially speaking, how much am I going to have to cough up? If I say, look, I'll provide 20%, and then we find out that the business is 900, how much am I really going to owe? It's a pretty straightforward setup, because if I want to know how much I'm paying 2 times whatever the total value for a share is for 10% of. What is 10%? I'm paying 20, so we're going to find that out. We're going to set that equation equal to 900,000. And that means for 10%, it's going to cost me 90 grand. Well, obviously, if I'm paying 20%, I'm paying 180,000. The person who has the 3 or a 30% stakeholder, or sorry, stake in the game is looking at 270,000, and then the 50%, 450, and hopefully we could see that $450,000 is half of 900,000, but those should all add up to $900,000, and that is the total amount. So if I'm going in with 20% skin in the game, that's where I'm at. Now, it doesn't matter. Technically, we added these up to be out of 10. We didn't have to do that. This is really just I'm taking 900,000 and I am paying 2/10 of that. If we think about 10 total parts to this thing, that's a percentage. We're saying 2 out of some total amount, whatever it is. So I could have said, hey, you know what? I'm buying 2 out of 10 parts of this business, but then we end up changing the numbers and we end up selling 100, people in on the idea. Total, people in on the idea. Now I'm getting, a fraction out of the whole 2 out of 100. Let's say I originally only going to buy 2 shares of our stock, if you want to call it that. It would be much less, right? It's all just ratios and percentages at this point. So if we're starting this business or anything else, again, all we're really doing is finding out the takeaway here, how much money we're putting in, how much ownership we have, how much liability, because again, depending on the type of business we set up, there's liability in our end. Even if I'm just a purchaser of stock and I go and buy a share of oil right now, I'm taking the risk that it's not going to go down, or that it's not going to go up, because it might not. But I make the assumption that it is, and then it does, and I end up doing really well there. How well I do depends on that ownership, but I'm not at risk for the whole company. I'm just at risk for my own. Whereas if I'm starting my own business and I want to sell widgets, whatever it is that I'm selling, I am taking on the whole liability of that business. I don't know how it's going to work out, but ultimately, I want it to do well. I want it to do good. But at the end of the day, what we're really just looking at is the organization of a business, and we're looking at what amount of money or capital can I put in to start this business, and who can I get to help me reduce some of the risk aside? Because let's face it, starting a business is going to be difficult. It's going to be challenging, and there are going to be days where we feel, well, this is a mistake. But the ones that push through and find that grit, I guess, that perseverance that they need, end up doing really well. Again, though, it comes down to who's going to fund it, who's going to support you in that idea, and then your business plan of getting that idea to grow and to flourish and do well, so that then you can see the rewards of that work. Basic lessons. All of these lessons are very small little pieces, so if you were looking for something more complex, I'm going to try to keep it as simple as I can, so that over a video, for my students especially, we don't have confusion and people feeling a little lost and unsure of what they're doing. So if you have questions, please ask on any lesson on the math. Again, the math on this one was pretty straightforward. Sometimes they can get kind of tedious. Make sure you're asking. Shoot me an email or contact me so that I can help you out. And we will see you in the next video.